All right, members, it is about time to make a start. Before I invite the administration into the conference room, I'd just like to remind members that this special House Committee meeting will end at 4, and the regular House Committee will go ahead straight afterwards. Shall we invite the administration in, please? I also like to say that at our meeting with the CS said that at this committee, other than the work of the SCPP and also the Poverty Commission, she also mentioned the injection into the CCF $15 billion. And she would also like to listen to members' views regarding the arrangement for the policy address for the coming year. If members wish to speak, please press the request to speak buttons, and I will call upon members, having regard to members' political persuasion. The number of times members have put questions previously, and I hope that members would make it brief. And when you take the floor to speak, I will restrict members to 5 minutes each for questions and answers. And as usual, this special House Committee meeting will be recorded on a verbatim basis. And we have the papers, CB2 845/12 to 13 bracket 01. And also the background brief on poverty alleviation prepared by the Secretariat, paper CB2 826/12 to 13, and also the information note on Hong Kong's population policy prepared by the Research Division of the Secretariat, IN04 bracket 12 to 13. I'd like to welcome the Chief Secretary for Administration and her team. Without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor over to the CS. Chairman, thank you. Thanks very much. Members, myself and my team will be reporting to members on 2 areas of work, the Steering Committee on Population Policy as well as the Commission on Poverty. In the discussion papers given to members, I have set out all the details. I don't really want to repeat them in detail, except to say that the SCPP was reconstituted last year. We have the CS as well as Bureau Secretaries chairing the committee. We also have experts and academics taking part. We've had 2 meetings. We have reviewed the data over the next 30 years, and there is every indication that the population is aging. The workforce in 5 years' time will begin to dwindle. The lack of workforce is an urgent issue for us. This will make it difficult for us to maintain the growth rate of 8.5%. This will also narrow the salaries tax base. Taxation will suffer, and this will also undermine our ability to deal with the aging population and associated problems. So it is an urgent task for us to review the population policy, and there is a preliminary agreement to deal with 3 areas. First of all, we have to give priority to local workforce. We should encourage more women to join the workforce. There should also be a flexible retirement arrangement to extend the working life. In the long term, we should encourage marriage and fertility. We can also consider replenishing our workforce with sources outside Hong Kong. We can encourage those who have emigrated outside Hong Kong to return. We should also make preparation for retirement. We should make retirement financial planning and create a good environment for the senior citizens. In September, we're going to have a public participation arrangement to make the public aware of the urgency of the matter and to invite public views. These will become the basis for the committee to formulate policies going forward. As regards the Commission on Poverty, it was reconstituted last year. There are 6 working groups under the COP. For this year, we will set the poverty line. The Social Security and Retirement Protection Task Force just had a meeting on Monday, and it is progressing well. We are confident that within this year we should be able to set the poverty line. As I said before, the formulation of the poverty line is by no means an alleviation measure. It is a tool for monitoring the poverty situation. For those who fall below the poverty line, we will try to map out measures to address them and to quantify the effectiveness of these measures. We adopted the concept of relative poverty, which means that there are always poor people. Statistically, it is unrealistic to eliminate poverty altogether, but we will be addressing this issue in a pragmatic manner. The chairman and vice chairman of the COP, myself, and SLW attended a seminar run by the HKCSS to engage the attendees in dialogues regarding the way forward. As regards to retirement protection, we should not shy away from this issue. On Monday, we've agreed that we'll be inviting Professor Nelson Chow to lead the team to conduct a study on this very important subject. It would take about a year's time for the study to be completed. The 5 working group, the Education Employment Training Task Force, the Special Needs Groups Task Force, the Societal Engagement Task Force, and the Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship Development Task Force and CCF Task Force are also getting on with their work. All the details are sent out in the paper. Finally, I'd like to say that in the budget there is a proposal to inject $15 billion into the CCF. I'm grateful to the Financial Secretary for the proposal that will enable us to redouble our effort to get on with the work. I've talked with members about this, and I've also briefed members of the public of the 3 possible uses of this fund. The first one is for those who cannot benefit from the budget relief measures, those what we call the N-nothing people. We can provide them some kind of assistance. Second, we enhance the CCF's capacity to plug the gaps in the existing system. There are a number of pilot schemes that are already in the press that are being considered by the CCF. Third, we'll continue with the implementation of programs which are proved to be effective but have not yet been incorporated into the government's regular assistance program, so that people can continue to enjoy the benefits of the CCF. To maintain this flexibility, we propose that the existing mode of operation should continue. The CCF has been around for a year or so. There have been 18 projects that have been implemented, and the CCF covers people from different strata. In the COP, there are 4 legislative members. So they can certainly play the role of a gatekeeper. They can monitor the functioning of the CCF. In order to enhance the transparency, we'd like to do more. Like, for instance, at the Subcommittee on Poverty, we are prepared to bring the subcommittee up to date on every 6 months. I will be listening carefully to what members have to say in this regard. Chairman, so much is a brief outline of the situation. I learned from members that regarding the policy address and also the briefings on the policy address, members did raise some concerns. I would like to take this opportunity today to hear what members have to say in this regard and respond to members' views. All right, thanks very much. CS, 5 minutes each. Mr. Kwok-wai-keung and Mr. Kwok-him. We'll look at the previous practice, the order in which members put questions before and members' political persuasion. And the order you push the button. Mr. Kwan-yuen. Chairman, thank you. The CS mentioned that we have to make good use of the existing workforce to address the dwindling working population. But if you refer to Appendix 2 of the paper, Annex 2, making good use of the existing workforce, there are 4 points there. Replenishing our workforce with sources outside Hong Kong, there are 6 points there. So I'm wondering whether this is exactly what you said. Now, since we have to make good use of the local workforce, why is it that there are different emphasis? There are only 4 initiatives under this. And in paragraph 5D, we help the new arrivals and ethnic minorities to be integrated into the community, and we'll consider bringing in whether it is suited Hong Kong's needs to bring in labor from outside. But why is it that in Appendix 2, in Annex 2, there is a proposal to import low-skilled labor? Now we have unemployment rate, which is pretty high for the young people. Even for construction trade, which is doing well, we have 7 to 12% in terms of unemployment and underemployment. Why is it that we are not doubling our effort in training up our people and place them in jobs? Why do we have to consider importing low-skilled labor from outside? CS? Thanks very much, Mr. Kwok. I fully appreciate that as a councillor from the labour sector, Mr. Kwok would be particularly concerned about this importation of labour. Now, this is only a list. Members must be aware that when we deal with a population policy, we have to be far-sighted. We simply cannot be restricted to what is lying ahead of us. So in the SCPP, we have 10 or so experts and academics and members from the trade. We're all aware that we have to take stock of the situation and try to get a grips with all the challenges. So Annex 2 is an encapsulation of all these challenges lying ahead of us. Now, you said there are 4 points in one category and 6 in the other. Now, if Mr. Kwok looks closer, it's not the number that matters, it is the details that really matter. Like 1, 2, promoting women or releasing more workforce from the existing population via promoting women, youth, and elderly employment. Well, I can split up into 3 for the sake of quantity. I mean, I can split up into women, youth, and elderly. So Mr. Kwok can rest assured that, that there is no hidden agenda here. Now, in terms of releasing workforce from the local population, we will not talk about importation lightly until we have done a good job in this regard. Also, we have to ascertain the fact that since we have all these importation or supplementary importation scheme, the SCPP has to take stock of the effectiveness of these measures and whether they are able to address the needs in the present day and going forward. Third, I'm sure Mr. Kwok is aware, as in my previous incarnation as Secretary for Development, I was very concerned about the labor situation. And over the years, we have devoted resources to attracting new blood into the construction industry. In his budget, the Financial Secretary has also put forward aviation, shipping, and so on, and we propose that we do similar things in this regard. Mr. Kwok, well, we are concerned about it because the government keeps talking about importing labor, and this is filling us with really alarm. I think to release the workforce, it is very straightforward. You should compensate people for the overtime work, and people are getting overtime for no pay at all.
Mr. Ip Kwok Him and then Mr. Chen Han Pan. Thank you, Chairman. CS. Society has shown a lot of concern about the wealth gap. Given our social system, there are many wealthy people, but at the same time, the poor are not leading a life of dignity. The CS has indeed talked about this issue of poverty. In the paper, and also when she spoke, she said that we would adopt the concept of relative poverty. My question is in two parts. In your paper, you mentioned that you're going to apply that concept, and also you're going to set the poverty line. In the paper, you said that it would be set at half the median income. How are you going to do that? Because there have been many different voices about your proposal. Some people are for, some people are against your proposal. Can you make use of the opportunity today to let us know more of your thoughts and also the justifications for your proposal? Number two. Well, there is a lot of talk already, but what about walking the walk? You said that you would set the poverty line within the year, but at what time during the year? So we have a poverty line so people can discuss whether it is set at the right place, and so that we can seek to help people below the poverty line. Because a lot of the welfare benefits now have been commented on by many people. CS? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain why the setting of the poverty line, which looks simple, may actually take some time. I like to say that the setting of the poverty line will need to achieve three objectives. Actually, it doesn't have the purpose of directly helping the poor. It doesn't say that who is below the poverty line will be directly be netted into social security schemes like the CSSA, because the biggest disadvantage of any poverty line is that it only looks at income but not assets. But most of the welfare benefits provided by the administration would include a check on assets. There are three functions of the poverty line. One, to have an objective and scientific way of drawing up that line so we can quantify the poor population. Number two, so that we can analyze the characteristics of these groups of poor people so that when we draw up policies, we can really benefit people. And number three, we like to do long-term readings. Say, for example, today we have a poverty line, and then we look at existing policies and measures. And say, by doing that, we can reduce the poor population by 10%. And then if we do more to help the poor, we would want to gauge the effectiveness of the extra measures. These are the functions of the poverty line. Why have we used so much time? Maybe I can defer to Mrs. Chan in a moment. There are a lot of data, but we do not have existing useful figures. As you know, people have been talking about over 1 million, but these are not figures that we can immediately make use of to set a poverty line achieving those three functions I have mentioned. The government economist and the Census and Statistics Department have made use of a lot of time in order to collate the figures and data and also to juxtapose them against internationally adopted methodology to see whether they are useful. As to the progress, well, I think it is still satisfactory. We are taking step after step. Next week, actually, the COP will have a plenary. The task force has got 2 discussions already, and it has looked at the figures and data, and they will be submitted to the COP. And after endorsement by the COP of the methodology, there will be a framework. But I have to say here that there will not be immediate release of any information because we have to come to grips of more accurate information before we can make any publication. Mrs. Chan. Yes, I'll say briefly that when we have a poverty line, it doesn't mean that we will look at one single figure. What is important is that we have to look at the different characteristics and features of the poor people below the poverty line. For example, working poor, poor elderly, the CSS8 households, single-parent families, and also new arrivals. It is important for us to do a lot of data analysis. We have seen publication of the poor population, but they are done with different concepts. What is important is the analytical framework to see what changes there are to the population of the poor before and after the introduction of poverty alleviation measures. And we have to do a lot of data analysis, but within the year we will try our very best to do the first detailed analysis after having the poverty line. Thank you. Mr. Chen Han-pan and then Mr. Kwok Ki. Thank you. Talking about the support to the elderly and making elderly-friendly measures, and also to inject into CCP, that has a purpose of plugging the gaps. But then I'm really concerned about dental benefits for the elderly. Before the last COP was disbanded, and also when CCF held its meetings, we said many times that we really need to provide dental subsidies to the elderly. Yes, the CCF is doing it in a small part, but we don't see a lot of effect from that. Now that you have the COP and also we have the CCF and also there is new injection. Now, can the CS tell us that there indeed will be a policy to help elderly people have better dentition, so that indeed there will be one elderly-friendly measure? Number two, in terms of our population policy, since we have a low birth rate, and a lot of new arrivals will be coming to replenish the population. But what about integration? I think the administration has a lot of room to improve its work in with regard to the ethnic minorities in particular. Can you let us know how you can let us know that the ethnic minorities will indeed be integrating into society with harmony so that we can replenish the drop in the population? CS, the first issue, to a certain extent, the injection into the CCF can indeed allow us to do more. The CCF has already approved 18 projects, and one of which is to provide support for elderly people to do something about their teeth, and it was rolled out in September last year to go on for 2 years. And each person can have up to like $9,000 to go to see a dentist. However, the eligibility was set rather strictly. I agree, Mr. Chan, that apart from the age, which is set at 60, which is quite acceptable, and also who is not on CSSA, that is quite acceptable because CSSA recipients already have some help. But then they also have to be receiving integrated family service from the SWD, and also another kind of family support which belongs to type 1 or type 2, which means they have to be weak and frail, and they have to be receiving some kind of service from the administration before they can benefit from this dental welfare. And I admit that not many people have benefited. But then if you want to relax this to help more people, then there will be a lot of financial implication. Now, as someone who cares for the elderly, I will be prepared to consider it. But then we have to see whether CCF does have the capacity to take care of so many elderly people. In any case, last month, we have reported to the CCF-TF the initial review results of this program. And the CCF-TF has particularly set up a working group to take stock of the implementation experience of this first project to see whether or not we have to, or how to adjust the scope of this measure. I hope Mr. Chan will be more happy with the answer. Now, this is exactly why CCF has to remain flexible. It has run for 4 or 5 months, but then we have heard a lot of people say it is not flexible enough, and indeed not so many people have benefited, and that is why now we have the flexibility to immediately analyze the situation and review it so more people can benefit. And I hope members will understand why we want to maintain the flexibility in the CCF. Secondly, in terms of the population policy, we reiterate this time that the purpose is not just the quantity but also quality. In other words, we are also looking for social harmony and integration. If we are going to inject people from outside into the population, we really have to have better measures and policy vis-a-vis integration and inclusiveness. Now, how ethnic minorities can be brought into the Hong Kong community, that is one important objective of our work. The same goes for COP. Therefore, we have a particular task force to look after the special needs groups, and they are discussing the learning of Chinese at the moment. Thank you. We hope the CS will have some good news to bring to the elderly people in Hong Kong. Right. Peter Charles Mock. I'd like to ask about population. In my view, the one-way permit scheme is a core issue to the population policy. On Wednesday, Mr. Sin Chung Kai asked an oral question, and the acting Secretary told us that in 1997, or from that year, from the 1st of July to the end of last year, 762,044 people with one-way permit entered Hong Kong. And you do your sums, and you will know that it would add up to 10% of the population of Hong Kong. If this goes on, you can imagine that the figure will snowball. It will fill up Hong Kong, and we are not just talking about IVS. There will be housing, education, housing, and other and medical issues. If there are too many tourists and visitors, we are already saying that we need to cap tourist arrivals. So is the daily figure of 150 too high? How did we come up with this figure? Should we adjust it? Is that some out-of-bound area for the Hong Kong administration? Why we have the one-way permit is, of course, primarily about family reunion, and there is a scoring system, and the acting secretary gave us a good explanation about that. But then we don't know how this is actually implemented. And also, if Hong Kong cannot really take it anymore, there must be a cap. Even for the U.S., it is not that whenever you apply for family reunion and suddenly everybody can go, and indeed people have to line up. I remember a councillor asked, somebody was found to be eligible and qualified, however they were made to stand in the queue. And the acting secretary was saying that it had nothing to do with Hong Kong, that it was up to the mainland authorities, this and that. I think now we need to see how we can get back the power to make a decision on this, and how people should be approved to come to Hong Kong. So I'd like to ask you whether the SCPP will look into this. Number one, whether we should reduce the daily quota of 150, and two, to get back the vetting authority, and that the scoring should be done by Hong Kong instead of allowing the mainland authorities to get on with the work. CS. I don't understand. Well, I shouldn't say this. Listening to Mr. Mock, it seems with regard to these people coming to Hong Kong to settle down with a one-way permit, it seems he has a negative view on this. No, I don't mean this. I mean this can be likened to the IVS. No, but the two are different. Up to now, these people who have come to Hong Kong with one-way permit have come into on the ground of family reunion. In other words, they are spouses and children, and children who have come of age, and also relatives of Hong Kong people who are not looked after by other people on the mainland, meaning their parents. So they are related to Hong Kong people, so they cannot be mentioned in one breath with tourists. And figures are telling us that we have a low birth rate in Hong Kong, and in this past period, these people would form the main most important main source of population increase for Hong Kong in the future. And I understand that these people who come in with a one-way permit would continue to be a main source of population increase. So the work lying in front of us is that these people are already connected to Hong Kong. As Mr. Chen Han-pan was saying, they are mainland people, but still, there may be some difficulty for them to get integrated into the Hong Kong community, and so we want to show particular care and concern for these people. Under the COP, the Special Needs Groups Task Force would, of course, pay attention to single parents, ethnic minorities, and also these new arrivals who may have difficulty in integrating into Hong Kong. So from the perspective of the SCPP, and to answer Mr. Mok, we would certainly take stock of how this system has done to the Hong Kong population in terms of quantity and quality. But then in terms of the vetting power, I'm afraid this will not be something for the SCPP, because this has something to do with the basic law requirements.
Mr. Mok, well, I don't think the CS has answered my question, and she's distorting my question in a way that makes it sound as if it is very negative. These are part of Hong Kong, but we do need to seize the right to give approval. Chairman, in 2041, 30% of the population will be elderly people, and a lot of them will be between 85 and 90. So between now and 2041, I hope that the administration will extrapolate 20, 30 years more, and that would give us some idea about the demographic profile among the senior citizens. Also, those above 65, the percentage is 13%, 2041, it go up to 30%. But in 2021, it will stand at 19%, or 1.4 million of the population. In other words, we don't have to wait until 2041 before we see an increase in the senior population. And we have to do something about the situation, like the retirement protection, the community care, and institutionalized care, and the retirement life, how to take advantage of their wealth experience, the general outpatient clinic and specialist clinic and so on. I understand that the retirement age is 60 at the moment. The government's retirement age is at this level anyway. So I'm wondering whether we can extend the retirement age to something like 65, so that people will carry on working for 5 more years. In many departments, there are so many different services that are catering for the elderly. But when it comes to the elderly, we seem to be focusing our attention on the LWB, the THB, and so on. But in fact, for education, environmental protection, and so on, they have everything to do with the senior citizens as well. I'm wondering whether you have a mainstreaming initiative for elderly people. For all departments across the board, when they formulate policy, they won't have this perspective for the senior citizens, and that would obviate the situation of any inconsistency. So from today on, will you have any long-term plan in terms of the increase in the elderly population? CS. First of all, I go along with Mr. Zheng that we don't have to wait until the senior population reaches 20–30% before we are concerned about it. When I was Director of Social Welfare, I said in 2011 those above 65 would reach this proportion, and by a certain date it would be more than 30%. And we had to make preparation for the aging population. So I can tell Mr. Cheung that, like I said the dwindling workforce is an urgent issue. If we do nothing, then the workforce will decline. So that's why we have to take full advantage of our workforce, release the workforce as much as possible. There is still room for improvement for women. We have seen an increase over the past decade, but there is still further room to push that. So first of all, I agree that we have to get on with this straight away. Second, for senior citizens, if you look at Annex 2, if you look at Category 3, supporting the elderly to better prepare for their retirement, we have moved away from healthcare. We are starting to talk about the development of a silver hair market. And also, we are providing elderly-friendly living environment. This has to do with THB, like encouraging and educating the public on financial planning for retirement and promoting the development of financial services and products for the elderly. Now, this has to do with the FSTB. I mean, I've already put down a marker with all these different bureaus and urged them to look after the senior citizens in accordance with their own portfolios. We should not dump everything on Mr. Matthew Cheung. So this is a concerted effort on our part. Mr. Chen Yunhan and Mr. Kenneth Leung. Chairman, thank you. As the CS said a moment ago, we have to prepare for rainy days. We should not wait until the problem arises before we do anything about it. Now, under the COP, Dr. Nelson Chow, Professor Nelson Chow, has been appointed to conduct a study on the issue. If I may put this to the administration, I would have been very happy at the mere when you talked about it, but I mean, normally the government would not be able to carry it through. Are we really minded to prepare for rainy days? Is the government going to roll up its sleeves and get on with all the recommendations to be made by Professor Nelson Chow? So it is for real. In terms of retirement protection, is this for real this time? CS? Chairman, this is a serious subject. Whether it is for real or not is easy to tell. Now, we have started this study on retirement protection. In his policy address, in his 5-year term, the CE mentioned that regarding the retirement protection and the facilities and so on, we should conduct an in-depth study, and hopefully through these studies we would be able to understand all the pros and cons of the different systems. In his budget, the FS also pointed out that the Social Security and Retirement Protection Task Force has been given the task to look into this complicated matter. And the FS hoped that the community would approach this issue in a pragmatic and rational manner, having regard to the financial sustainability and the financial burden for the next generation. Now, for us to conduct detailed and pragmatic study, we should have some basis. In the community out there have been a lot of research findings published. Recently, the Alliance on Universal Retirement Protection approached me with all the details. Now, there are so many different computation methodology, like poverty line. There are many different methodologies to formulate the poverty line, which may not be the same as what we have in mind. So we have to approach this issue in a rational and pragmatic manner. For a complicated issue like this, if we have to start the tendering exercise all over again, we may be wasting our time. So I'm really glad that we have been able to invite Professor Nelson Chow to conduct this study. So this goes to show to Ms. Chen that we are being serious as to whether we're going to be able to roll up our sleeves and get on with the retirement protection. I think we do need to have discussion in the community. This is a controversial subject, Ms. Chen. I agree with you there, but my colleague told me that you are really taking a retrograde step. Now, at the CPU, this was discussed for some considerable time. We've had a lot of studies in the community. I agree that we have to be careful in this regard. But today, the FS highlighted the problem in his budget. I think it is good for us to have all these views. Now, we are sitting on a lot of money. Now, we have invited Professor Nelson Chow, and we are making preparation for our future. If you are brushing the recommendations aside, then the younger generation will have a really crushing burden arising from the elderly population. So I'm asking whether you are really being for real, or are you merely using Professor Nelson Chow? CS? Right, let me answer this seriously, but briefly. Definitely we'll follow up on the issue. That this study by Professor Chow will take about a year. He will have some focus groups, and he will be liaising with all these different organizations that have conducted studies before. And the study itself will not have a widespread or extensive public involvement. So after the study has been published, we will engage the public in extensive discussion.
Secretary, I have two questions in relation to the population policy. In your briefing paper to the Council, in paragraph 3b, it said the local fertility rate has remained persistently low, in fact, for the past 2 decades. I would like to ask the government, since the fertility rate has been so low for the past 2 decades, what measures have the government adopted for the past 2 decades to encourage people to reproduce more? In fact, some of the voters in my constituencies have always mentioned to me that there are two big considerations whether to raise a child in Hong Kong. One is education, the other is housing. There is also a suggestion put to me that apart from giving tax allowance to married couples, will the government consider giving cash subsidies to families who had newly born babies? Now, that is my first question. The second question is a very core issue, which I don't know whether the government has already answered. In fact, some of my voters has put forward this proposal to me that Hong Kong does not provide a conducive environment for reproduction. Put it in simple terms, married couples does not have to have sex that frequently because of work stress and living environment. These are my two questions. Thank you.
CS?
Answer the second question first, which is I don't have an answer to that. I think this is a very personal matter on what sort of environment is more conducive to reproduction. As far as the first question is concerned, Mr. Leung has raised various suggestions on how any government could interfere or intervene to help boost fertility rates. For the time being, we are open-minded. Over the previous years, we have done several things in terms of tax allowances for children, for firstborns. We have also lengthened the maternity leave and introduced the paternal leave, and so on and so on. But of course, at the end of the day, it's really a personal choice. I know that most parents these days, or most people these days are worried about education and housing, and which makes it very difficult for them to raise a family. So many of them prefer to keep a pet, I was told by my peers. But as far as the work of the steering committee is concerned, we are open-minded. And in fact, we realize that this is a topic that perhaps needs some overseas references. So the Central Policy Unit has been asked to undertake a study to look at overseas countries' experiences and how they can, through government measures, of course, help to boost local fertility rates. And so if Mr. Leung's voters have other bright ideas for us, we're more than happy to receive them. Thank you.
Chairman, Madam Chief Secretary, I think in paragraph 4C, you have said manpower shortage is not only an issue of quantity, but also quality. I think by only having organic growth within our population, I think that is the principal guarantee of a quality population, because it is organic, it's not import. So we have the quality control here. Thank you.
Ms. Alice Mack and then Mr. Ip Kwan-yuen. Chairman, CS, in terms of population policy, you have said that we should release more workforce from the existing population in Hong Kong. And I'm very happy to see the CS say that there should be a higher working rate of women. But I'd like to say that if we want to enhance the workforce or release the workforce, actually there are many problems with the employment ordinance that have to be looked into at the same time. For example, if you want to enhance the working rate of women, the Women Committee of the FTU has always said that in terms of working women having babies, they should be given full pay, maternity pay, and also maternity leave. And also, this should be aligned with the International Labour Organization's rules. We have made that request many times, but it seems in reviewing the EO, the administration is still very much lagging behind the international practice. Therefore, when you talk about releasing more workforce and allowing more women to work, I like the CS to also review the backwardness of the EO at the same time, or else this will just be empty talk. Because there may be policies and other policies, but they do not dovetail. As Mr. Kenneth Leung was talking about, this is about reproduction. If we do not help working women with their reproduction, how can you expect to encourage reproduction so that we can reduce the aging problem in Hong Kong? Secondly, I'd really like to thank Mr. Kenneth Leung for mentioning the fertility rate in Hong Kong. I think it's very simple. We can have standard working hours and that will solve the whole problem. If working people will have lesser work pressure, then we should go for standard working hours. And this is not just for married people. We have done many surveys. Even for the unmarried people, standard working hours would be important to them because, first of all, they have to have time to get married. Secondly, when you review the population policy and also talking about the workforce, you must not lose sight of people who are over 65. But then there are also people who are between 60 and 64. They retire at 60, but they have nothing whatsoever in terms of benefits between 60 and 64. They cannot get OAA, they do not have MPF payments. How do you expect them to survive? They do not want to get benefits from the government. They would like to continue with their employment. It seems they have always been neglected. We don't support them with any benefits. But in terms of employment, we do not support them in extending their employment. In other words, that they should be able to work even after retirement. When we review the aging population problem, let us not forget people who are compelled to retire at 60. Mr. Tam can talk about the labor workforce, but with regard to people who are between 60 and 64, I agree that we should introduce flexible retirement arrangements or extension of the retirement age so that these people between 60 and 64, or even when they are beyond the age of 64, so that they can continue to work. I agree that now there is no statutory retirement age in society. However, the retirement age is set at 60 in government, and I believe there is room for review. This was asked by Mr. Peter Chung, but I have not answered him, but I have already asked the CSB to look into this. I understand that at this council, some members have asked the same question, and CSB unions have also raised the same issue with me. The SCPP will be talking to the relevant bureaus on this one. Ms. Tam. Indeed, we agree with Ms. Mack that we should really roll out family-friendly employment practices, and the Labour Department has always been acting as a facilitator. A lot of the work of the Labour Department is for promoting better liaison with employers and employees. Indeed, that is going to benefit employers as well, because family-friendly employment practices will help them retain employees that they find to be good. And actually, under the employment ordinance, we do provide conditions, for example, rest days and maternity leave and annual leave, etc. We have got these measures in place for some time, and we are considering drawing up some legislation to implement the paternity leave so that more women will be able to work in the labor market, and so women can give play to their skills. The Women's Commission will also discuss this, and we can relate these views to the Women's Commission for discussion. Thank you, Mr. Ip Kwan-yuen, and then Ms. Sit Ho. Chairman, on the issue of the birth rate, I think it is an important issue. This has everything to do with the quality of life, and this have a bearing on the dependence ratio and also family life. If you look at the information from the Secretariat, you will know that in 2001, the birth rate was lowest in the world. Every adult woman during childbearing age was only giving birth to 0.9 babies, and now it has gone up just to 1.2, the lowest in the world. In Japan, they have already got a particular minister to look after the encouragement of giving birth, but then it seems we have done nothing here. Just now, Mr. Kenneth Leung, I think he made a most valid point. And that is very often you would give thoughts to education and housing when you think about having children. Now, on education, I'd like to mention a particular point. In 2006, I believe you still remember that Ms. Li Lai Shan was featured in this advertisement, and that is you need $4 million to rear a child. And I think that had a negative bearing on the birth rate in that year. Why do we need so much money in bringing up children? One of the reasons is education. Well, the housing cost and education cost have continued to grow, and that has made people reluctant to have children. Rather, they would keep pets. Education in the public sector is not doing what it used to do in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Education costs are going up because, well, I can just say that now we have more direct subsidy schools. Many of them are renowned schools. Some of these renowned schools did not require the payment of school fee, but now they have become DSS, and now they fetch a high school fee. If you think this is a reliable and quality education source, you need to pay a lot more money for them. Now we pay more attention to pre-primary education, but it's still not free. And the same for university places. We don't have enough of them for our young people. One more thing. Discrepancies among schools, which remain to be big. So if you have children, it depends on your luck whether you can get them into a good school. I was talking to the CS a moment ago, and she was going to a school, and there were many good facilities. But you can talk to Miss Emily Lau, and she will tell you that there can be a big gap between schools in terms of quality and facilities. And therefore, parents may think that they face some risk vis-a-vis the education for their children. Therefore, if you want to do something, you really have to make sure that there will be a strong quality public education sector, so people's education cost will go down, so people who don't have the opportunity to, or they choose not to view French movies, and even the grassroots will be reassured that they can have children, including having a second child, so you can boost the birth rate. I think that is so important. I hope the administration will give some serious thought to this. Second question, some statistics, please. Mr. Ip, do you want the CS to respond to you? Well, okay, CS. Mr. Ip asked many questions. Well, actually, I would like to listen to Mr. Ip more because I don't want to delve into these very in-depth questions on education with Mr. Ip today. Maybe if he wants some statistics, I can give him the statistics today. Yes, I can take that up with the CS at a later stage. Secondly, about the planning of education, and that has something to do with your statistics. One-way permit holders, 150 per day. They are coming in to replenish the population of Hong Kong. But 10 years ago, I was drawn to this issue, and I was already aware that the proportion of children among the one-way permit holders has continued to go down. I'd like to be updated, please, about this. Secondly, about the cross-boundary population and the ratio between children born to non-Hong Kong residents vis-a-vis those whose parents, one of them, is a Hong Kong person. Now, I'd like to know the ratio between those two types of babies. Do you have the information? If yes, please give it to me later on. Ms. Sito, can you ask the CS to just say one word? And we can give it to you after the meeting. Yeah, you can take that up again after the meeting. Ms. Sito, thank you. I'd like to ask the CS 3 questions. Number 1, the women joining the workforce. If I could go to para 3C of the paper, it says that we can release the women's working power, and now it is at 49.6% for women, but 51.5% for men. I'd like to remind the CS that actually many women stay at home to take care of chronically ill and weak and frail elderly people. If you have more residential care places for the elderly, then these women do not have to act as carers for the elderly people, and so they can work in the workforce. And also, with residential care, women who work there can actually take care of more than one weak and frail elderly person. However, these people who work at home have not been calculated into the women workforce. To you, it's just a figure, but to the woman, to the family, it is a matter of income. So CS, please consider having a carer's subsidy. They should get it. Indeed, they have contributed the labor, the time to the family, and that has kept them at home. And therefore, they will not be very well supported after retirement because they do not have retirement benefits. I hope you will consider this. The Labour Party is that there should be $3,000 given to these carers every month. There can be different administrative details, but I can discuss with you these details later as to how we can identify this group of women who are elderly carers and who should get the subsidy. Secondly, the N-nothings. Every time we roll out a poverty measure, these people who don't pay tax, who don't live in public housing, who don't have an independent electricity account meter, and who do not get CSSA, they are very much affected. And now you net them into the CCF. We hope this is not going to be temporary, but something to stay. And in the long term, we want to review whether people need to satisfy the 7 years stay criterion before they can get CSSA. But before we can review these administrative measures, actually these people who are N-nothings should be forever kept within CCF instead of being reviewed a year or after 2 years. Well, you need money for doing these 2 measures. And that brings me to the seed money of $15 billion for the CCF. CS, I think you have the entire authority to make use of this money. But if you only use the interest generated from the deposit, I'm afraid there is only very little we can do. So CS, I'd like to tell you to tell me in what circumstance would you consider using the capital of the CSSB? Will there be objective criteria that you can let us know now? So we know under what circumstances you would be happy to make use of the capital, the original CCF, instead of just making use of the interest generated from the bank deposit. And the capital would only be made use of after some argument. And so you leave the N-nothings aside without helping them. CS, thank you, Ms. Ho, for the 3 questions. All 3 have to do with the CCF in some ways. On the carers subsidy issue, I would say that we should talk about elderly carers subsidy, because the first step is to try to see whether we can have a subsidy that works for carers for the elderly. I have talked to the Commission on the Elderly, and they have already got some discussion, and then we'll revert to the CCF task force. Now, this is a pilot scheme that really we want to look into. Apart from what is said that within CSSA, we might go for a savings account to give people the work incentive. In fact, another pilot we'd like to first try is the elderly carers subsidy. And in the latter half of the year, if we are going to roll out the community care voucher, we would like to see whether people who cannot get the voucher can have a choice. Ms. Ho, if you have got details, I'm very happy to take that up with you outside this meeting, because I think there are many merits to this. For example, now we don't have the hardware in terms of residential places, and also the software in terms of residential carers. Now, this might be one way out for the moment. Secondly, the N-nothings. Through the CCF project, we have already identified about 20,000 households with about 39,000 people. Now, if we are going to relax the definition of subdivided flats, we might well be talking about 50,000 to 60,000 people. So the injection of 15 billion people, as you have heard from me, is that if we really think that these people also need our support, then in other words, if the project is found to be effective, well, even if they are not included in the regular scheme, I will not go into the details today, but since we have the $15 billion injection, I can continuously give them support, and we do not have to curtail the support.
關係基金咧係有呢個好處喺度嘅。第三咧就喺當日財政預算案公佈，我已經係公開講咧，呢個150億嘅額外注資咧，唔係淨係用個利息嘅。雖然係冇錯，單係利息如果擺喺金管局咧，我哋都有每。
We don't simply use the interest. We have the money with the Hong Kong MA. Where necessary, we can take advantage of the principal. Now, with this $15 billion, we can generate interest. We don't really have any particular criteria for the time being, but there is no limit to this. Mr. Wuchiwai. Chairman, many members talked about retirement and aging population. Now, in fact, the aging population in Hong Kong means that despite the people getting old, people are still very, very able to do things. So I think that we have to make a distinction between the elderly people who are capable and those who are not capable, and that would make a difference to how we support them. Second, the retirement age. We said earlier that there is a problem with the workforce, which is declining. It seems to me from the CS that we're not going to deal with the authorization power with regard to one-way permit. Now, if the central authorities do not yield the authority to Hong Kong to choose who is coming to Hong Kong, then it would be difficult for us to have any selection process. So I hope that the CS would reveal the situation as to whether the authorization power under the one-way permit would make a difference to the situation, or are you prepared to talk to the central authorities about it? Also, the CCF poverty alleviation work, the Democratic Party has said many times that for those who are living in petitioned cubicles, subdivided units, the best support would be some kind of rental subsidy. Now, if they are on the waiting list for popular rental housing, then that can be one of the criteria that would enable the administration to offer them some kind of rental assistance to alleviate their plight. Many members talked about childbirth. I mean, it's entirely people's decision to decide whether to start a family. But if there is no hope given to them by the administration, people would choose not to start a family because they do have a lot of anxieties about the future. In particular, when the constitutional development is not in our hands, and many people would choose not to start a family. CS, on the first point, basically we are in agreement. The elderly population now would be different from the elderly population in future. So when it comes to elderly population, we should not think of the senior citizens as some kind of a liability. So we will take into account what Mr. Wu had to say. Now we are talking about the silver hair market, the financial products for the elderly, and housing and so on. We'll bear this in mind. Now, in relation to the one-way permit, this is one of the sources of our population, but they come here for family reunion. They are related to Hong Kong people. There is no question of us not seizing the initiative. As regards poverty alleviation, I think it would be more effective than just using the PRH waiting list. As far as I'm aware, for those on the waiting list, these people have not been subject to any test at all. Our definition is we use the living condition. Now, previously, the definition excluded those who are living in subdivided flats. And I mean, if we adopt this definition, we may unnecessarily exclude certain people from the equation. So inadequately housed is something that we would adopt as the definition. We will assist them with the CCF. We don't want to call it rental assistance, because whatever assistance we offer them financially, it will go into the pocket of the landlords. Mr. Christopher Zhang and then Mr. James or Michael Tin. Chairman, the CCF services are for the grassroots people. I'm wondering whether the government will incorporate these services into the mainstream recurrent expenditure. If so, what sort of factors would have to be taken into account, and what sort of problems will be encountered? CS. As regards the CCF, we do have an evaluation on each and every initiative, so that the Commission on Poverty would be in a position to tell whether the initiatives are in line with the original objective. Now, for the initiatives to be incorporated into the regular program, we have to make sure that they measure up to the effectiveness of the programs. One of them that has been incorporated is the one to do with Samaritan Fund. Under the Samaritan Fund, the patients could get hold of certain medicine. Now we have incorporated this into the regular initiative under the Samaritan Fund. For the other three, they have proved to be effective. They can be incorporated into the regular program. But still, we would like to conduct further studies. For the recipients, it's not the most important thing whether you incorporate them into the regular program. That includes the lunch subsidy for primary schools, and also for those for the people who have purchased their property under the TPS scheme, they're not entitled to any subsidy, but under the CCF, we still offer them subsidy to do with their accommodation. Third, there are some pre-primary students who are waiting for rehabilitation services, and these have been very effective. Now, of the three, I believe that there is still some work that has to be done to smooth them out, and we are continuing with them under the CCF for the time being. I must say that we're seeking an injection of $15 billion, and that would give us that much more room and confidence to tell the recipients that as long as they benefit from the CCF once, and as long as these initiatives are effective, they will continue to benefit from them until such time as they have been incorporated into the regular program. Mr. Michael Tin, Chairman, thank you. I must declare that I'm a member of the COP. I've got two questions for the CS. First of all, the paper mentions the aging population. Those above the age of 65 in 2041 would go up to 2.5 billion, and the elderly dependency ratio will come down from 5 to 1 to 2 to 1. Construction, retail, elderly, there is a shortage of labor, and there is talk of importing labor. I heard a case earlier which is particularly alarming. There is a 70-year-old care worker. She's looking after the elderly people. She's 73. In fact, in the elderly care sector, there is an acute shortage of labor. There are older people looking after the younger people. In the trade, I've heard that in the 2010, the broad pay scheme, the carers are on average 53 years of age. There are 20% of the people who are 60 years of age. It shows that in this industry, no young people are prepared to join. However hard you try to recruit, they find it difficult to recruit in this obnoxious trade. I mean, even for fashion retail sector, it would be difficult for us to find young people to start with, let alone this elderly care service. Now, there are more and more old people who need care, and we don't have young people joining. Are we deluding ourselves? If there are certain trades in Hong Kong for which, however hard you train up the people, we simply cannot recruit the right number of people, shouldn't we talk about this instead of just deluding ourselves? Now, there are certain trades like auto repair, there may be young people joining, but elderly care, people just can't be bothered. So I hope that the CS would tell us what measures you have up your sleeve to address the problems arising from this large elderly population of 2.5 million. Second, population policy. Now, this is terribly in Hong Kong, terribly important to Hong Kong. We have talked enough about encouraging childbirth. Now, many young people do have accommodation themselves, but education is really something that is too challenging for them. Now, we said that we should replenish our population with the one-way permit people. This leaves me scratching my head. Now, we're trying to get these people acclimatized to Hong Kong. I mean, if they can get adjusted to Hong Kong, we will be doing a good job. Now, with these people, given their educational attainment, I think that we are deluding ourselves in a way. Have we looked at other countries with successful immigration policy, like the United States. How can they attract young people? How can we attract young people to Hong Kong? We have the mainland as our hinterland, 3% unemployment rate. I mean, this is something that is the envy of many people. I've never heard of any policy to attract the young people to come and stay in Hong Kong. CS? Well, let me say this in response. We do have the supplementary labor scheme at the moment. Through the LAB, we can import labor from outside Hong Kong. As of December, through this particular scheme, there are two categories of people, I believe. The first one is what Mr. Tian is concerned about, and that is the care workers. People are not joining the trade, and the elderly people do need care. So under this supplementary labor scheme, I hope that the employer and the employee would appreciate that there is a shortage. I hope that more carers can be brought into Hong Kong to look after the senior citizens. The Social Welfare Department will work hard to replenish our labor with imported laborers. Can I say something about the immigration policy? Well, we'll look at the immigration policy. You mentioned the best practices overseas. We'll look into them. Well, I hope that you would go beyond the study stage. This is important.
Mr. Lowicock, thank you. CS? Many issues spin around caring for the elderly. The CCF is stepping up caring for elderly people who age in place. I think this is so desirable. I support it. But caring for elderly people who age in place doesn't mean that we can neglect the urgent need to build residential homes. I have been to elderly residential homes. Very often it's just one small house with 3 stories, 700 square feet each. Those who are more mobile will stay on the ground level, but those who are not mobile at all will be bound to the beds on the second floor. In other words, they would just go up and stay there, and they leave only when they leave for the final time. I would say that therefore our elderly people may not necessarily lead a dignified life. The institute workers work very hard, but then the resources they get is meager, so they cannot give the best care to elderly people. There is a high demand for public residential homes for the elderly, and that has been on the drawing board for many years. I don't know whether the CCF will do something about this, but even if it is not within the remit of the CCF, I'd like to know what plans and measures you have in mind to tackle this. Secondly, I'd like to know more about the CCF, because at the beginning of the setting up of the fund, it was supposed to be a matching fund. In other words, there would be community donation and support, and that would be matched by the administration. But it seems you're now injecting $15 billion into it, and does it mean that it is no longer a matching fund? And since there is still time, I'd like to know more about this $15 billion, which is by no means a small amount. Now that the investment interest is low, I'd like to know how you can make sure that the $15 billion will attract good investment return so you can meet the needs of those in need in society. CS, number 1, about elderly homes and their facilities. As Mr. Low, I personally am very concerned about this as well. These homes have to be purpose-built. Since we have a shortage of land and housing, we just cannot solely rely on the private market to supply this. I remember when I was the director of social welfare, we were already promoting institution-led care services for the elderly. So whether we provide it with the HA or we put it as a condition in the land lease, or we have a policy to encourage private developers, if they go for a lease modification and if they are willing to provide some kind of elderly home, then they do not have to pay up the premium. Even if it is farmland, they don't have to pay any premium. However, the property market has been too exuberant, and all measures have lost their attractiveness. But then today, we have Ms. Tam here from the LW Bureau, and she herself is leading a discussion with NGOs. When they go about redevelopment projects, it is hoped that elderly homes supply can be boosted. I can tell Mr. Low here that we will work at our level best, and we will take a long-term view of the provision of elderly homes and the facilities they offer. Secondly, the matching issue. Indeed, the last CE announced the concept in one of his policy addresses, and he said that the government and the business sector will each fork out $5 billion to set up the fund. But when the paper came to the Finance Committee for approving the part of the government funding, we already explained that it was not a matching fund. We would be happy about donations from the business community because we can do more for the poor, but then it is not going to be a matching fund. Today, we are injecting $15 billion into the CCF, and there is no element of matching anymore. After all, helping the poor is a responsibility of the government, and I can tell the business community this. Even if they are not forking out the entire $5 billion, we have seen that in recent years, many business people are doing their part in helping the poor, whether it be at the community level or in the schools. Number 3, CCF has been given $5 billion not so long ago, and it was from the investment of the Hong Kong MA. The return rate was at 5%. It is a little guaranteed in a way, but the disadvantage is that the $5 billion could be said to have been locked up because you have to allow the fund to stay there until the maturity period before you can get the interest. Ms. Dari Lee, I'd like to ask a question about the SCPP. Number 1, that you'd like to make the best use of existing the population, and you talk about strengthening families. But then if you go on reading the paper, you say nothing more about the strengthening of families. Families are less cohesive nowadays, and you can see many cases telling you this. And family and population and labor force, all of these are intertwined and interlinked. So I'd like you to say more about the strengthening of families instead of just mentioning it once. Does it mean that the SCPP will do nothing to follow up that initiative? If the government will plow in resources to strengthen the cohesiveness of families, I'm sure you will have to pay less in making up for not doing this now. But families have undergone changes. There is a high divorce rate. And many parents are saying that they do not do good parenting, and yet when they don't know how to be good parents, they get little support from the community. So I hope that at suitable forums, you will do some thematic study into family conditions in Hong Kong, and I hope you will actually roll out specific family-friendly policies to increase the cohesiveness of families. Number 2, encouraging the birth rate. I hope, yes, we are focused on this already, but I hope you will not neglect one particular group. It is not easy to encourage Hong Kong people to have children. Even if you dish out money, you might not be able to encourage people to have children. But then there are other people who would like to have babies, but however, they do not have children. Hong Kong people are getting married at a later age, and they may not have high education. These are the infertile families, and they would like to get support. Recently, an academic was telling me that information shows that the rate might be high. 1 to 2 couples out of every 10 couples might be infertile if they are grassroots or marginally middle class, and they have to wait for treatment from government hospitals. They have to wait 5-6 years. Just think about this. 5-6 years for a woman may mean another stage of their childbearing age. And also, if you go for in vitro fertilization in the private market, you might have to fork out as much as $100,000. So in terms of encouraging the birth rate, can the CS promise that you will not neglect this group of families and that you will take measures to help them have children? So because they are the people who want to have the next generation. CS. Thank you, Ms. Lee. In Annex 2, it is a list of issues to be studied by the SCPP. Certainly, they will be followed up. This is just a list of the topics. And you can see that these issues are going to be having an interactive relationship with high-ranking committees within government. Therefore, in terms of encouraging women to work and have baby, we will go through the LW Bureau to talk to the Women's Commission and the Families Council, so they can delve into the issues, and then we'll come back to the SCPP. If there are policy issues or measures proposed by these committees, I'm sure the SCPP will follow up and study into them. As for encouraging people to have babies, I have said that the CPU will study into this, and after the meeting, we will relate that specific proposal by Ms. Lee to the CPU, i.e. helping infertile couples to have children. We'll let the CPU know. Thank you. Next, Dr. Kwakaki, and the last one, Mr. Vincent Fang. Thank you, Chairman. The FS read out his budget, and when he did so, I believe many people were disappointed, whether they be the middle class or grassroots. There are no long-term promises in the budget, for example, how people are taken care of after retirement. But then on that day, CS, you thanked the FS for giving you $15 billion for the CCF. Now, I'm talking about the concepts here. Ms. CS, you have been a civil servant for many years. In terms of public policy, the CCF should be a short-term refuge kind of fund. So there were a lot of grievances in the community, and you say the developers should fork out $5 billion and the government $5 billion. I think it is quite a strange being. We thought that that was going to be transitional only, and in the end, the government will roll out policies to take the place of CCF. But in the end, this deformed fetus, so to speak, has not been replaced by long-term government policies. And in the first budget of this term of government, you are making use of this special way to inject funding into the CCF. I think this might be due to one of the following two reasons. One, that in terms of policy to alleviate poverty, you have not been effective all these years. Because if your policies were sustainable, then you wouldn't have to put out fires every day. If the long-term poverty alleviation measures are effective in helping the elderly people, for example, to look after their teeth, etc., if they can have proper channels to have the benefit, and if you can go through proper channels to help those people in need, then you don't need the CCF. However, this is an extraordinary way of doing your work. And the community is of the view that, in fact, this CCF is like your popularity fund. And now you have over $20 billion in all in the CCF. This will be there to boost your popularity. Well, it's quite some handsome money to do it. Now, I don't want to believe that is true. But if it is not true, why has the government gone for this very extraordinary way to do its work? The CCF is a strange phenomenon. It doesn't need approval by the LegCo. It is not under the monitoring or supervision of the community. To us, this has gone against the time-honored and well-established practices of the government because it is not regulated in any way. It lacks long-term perspectives. So why have you gone for this very strange way of serving the community? What is your explanation? And how can we be satisfied that you thank the FS not for the public but for yourself? CS. I must point out that the CCF is not a personal fund. It is a fund to help the poor. The CCF is not just monitored or supervised by the CS. The CS does not dictate the use of the fund. In the organization structure, there is a task force looking at the CCF, and most of the people in the task force are from outside government. And the proposals of the task force would be taken back to the COP. Yes, I am the chairman of the COP, but the COP is made up of people from different walks of life. And as I said, there are 4 legislative councillors from different political affiliations who are there to monitor the work of the COP and therefore the use of the CCF. Mr. Kwok seems to be saying that the government has injected $5 billion and this time around $15 billion without doing anything in terms of policies to help the poor. But I'm afraid this is not the truth. If you look at recurrent expenditure on welfare, since the handover, we have got a cumulative increase of 178%. Just look at this year, and that is 2013-14 as compared to 2012-13. There should be an increase of over 30%. This goes to show that there are policies for providing long-term care. For example, the old age allowance scheme that will be included in the expenditure of the next year, and there is also another $6 billion that will be spent. Therefore, I can tell Mr. Kwok that the CCF is there to plug the gaps and to undertake pilots, but then at the same time we are also doing sustainable, continuous and regular work to support the poor. But then every policy has its constraints. But even so, we should not neglect the use of resources to help people who are now in need. I hope Mr. Kwok will understand that the CCF is of value in its own right. And in these 2 years, many people in the community and also the 100,000 people who have been helped, they welcome the fund. Mr. Vincent Fang.
Chairman, I am also concerned about the population policy myself, because this has to do with the governance of the administration and the distribution of resources. We are running short of housing. A couple of years ago, when I was serving the hospital authority, the government stopped all these nurse training and doctor training, and now we're running short of doctors and nurses. Now, we also talked about the closure of schools before. This morning, we heard that there are 4 village schools that will be reopened. The government doesn't seem to have any long-term plan, and this is the crux of the matter. In your papers, yes, you mentioned that 200,000 people below the age of 21 will be moving to Hong Kong. 100,000 will be moving to Hong Kong who are under the age of 21, and they need education, healthcare and so on. Where are resources going to come from? Do we have any idea in terms of healthcare and education and housing and so on, with 100,000 people, mainland people born in Hong Kong, who will be coming back to Hong Kong by the age that they hit 21? And if they are below 18, you still have to allow the parents to come and look after them. Will the Hong Kong government be able to cope with such a heavy burden? CS? Right, in terms of population projection, 50% of the type 2 baby are likely to be coming and living in Hong Kong by age 21. Now, the Census and Statistics Department did conduct 6 rounds of surveys, and we derived the figure from these exercises. It would be difficult to be precise, however. Anyhow, for these type 2 babies, in terms of education and other areas, how can we cope and so on? The CE is also of the opinion that we have to do a better job in following up on these. So we are looking at the demand arising from that. The most important thing is the demand for school places. This year in the Northern District, there is a a very heavy demand. There is a shortfall of about more than 1,000 school places. It's going to be getting worse in the coming years. So the Education Bureau is working hard to deal with these school places. And we hope that we will be able to look after the students in the Northern District, but at the same time we will be able to cope with the students from the mainland. This is a complicated issue, but we will be rising to the challenges, and through various measures we will be able to cope with this issue. Mr. Fang, well, you mentioned schools. What about the 5-year plan? Now you are opening up 4 village schools. In 5 years' time, are you going to be opening up 4 times as many? And also for public hospitals, you are at capacity at the current moment. In 5 years' time, with these type 2 babies coming to Hong Kong, how much more demand will be generated by these type 2 babies? In the coming 5 years, I am concerned that you may not be able to cope. CS, all the bureaus will have to conduct the studies. All right, 17 members have put questions today. 19 failed to do so. The CS would like to hear our views regarding the policy address arrangement, but no members raised anything. Chairman, should we invite the CS again, because there are more members who fail to put questions than those who have? Well, we'll make a suitable arrangement. I will work it out with the CS. As regards the arrangement for the PA, I hope that members will take up the issue on a separate occasion. Now, for these $15 billion injection into the CCF, what is the next step as far as the government is concerned? CS, when the budget is endorsed, we will be submitting a funding proposal to the Finance Committee. Ms. Lau, well, I hope that the CS would like to come again. We have all these questions for her, but we failed to do so. Thanks very much, CS, and your team. We take a break for 5 minutes, and we come back for the regular House Committee.